And actually, there was another decision maker involved that we actually had to convince. And this is one thing I always ask with people is when someone says they are the decision maker, they could be one of the decision makers. So a question, instead of saying, are you the decision maker? You could say, other than yourself, who would be involved with the decision making on the sale of this property?
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 258. What does it take to find off-market deals and convert the owners of these properties into sellers? Well, my guest today is going to help answer that question. Sterling White is a multifamily investor who specializes in value-add apartments in Indianapolis and other midwestern markets. In just under 10 years, he's created a $19 million portfolio through his company, Sonder Investment Group. Sterling is a seasoned real estate investor, philanthropist, speaker, podcast host, and mentor. He's also the author of the book From Zero to 400 Units, and he hosts the Real Estate Experience podcast. He was also previously a guest on episode 163. Sterling, welcome back to the show.
Super excited about this, you guys. Go ahead, strap yourselves in, seatbelts. We're about to take you on for a roller coaster ride. Grab your little gift bags because we're about to drop golden nuggets, so you'll want to be sure to pick those up.
I can't wait to look into my gift bag and see what's in there, Sterling. Now, you've been on the show before, so I won't ask you the basic question that I ask everyone, which is how'd you get started? But we were talking before the show, and you really wanted to say something about limiting beliefs. So before we get into talking to sellers and dealing with them directly off market, tell us a little bit about the limiting beliefs that you had to overcome before you could become a successful real estate investor.
Yeah, so I had quite a bit, and this really stemmed from childhood. One of the limiting beliefs was you had to have a large amount of wealth and money to get started in real estate, that in order to be wealthy, and limiting beliefs can really constrict you and pull you down. Another one was in order to be rich and wealthy, that you had to do unethical things. Just imagine someone who's ethical and they have that type of belief. Why would they want to be rich if they have that? And however, I had one pivotal moment that really helped, among other pivotal moments, but this was key. In my early college days, I was at a college boathouse party, having a good time, doing what college people do. And I was out, I tend to shift away from the crowd, and I'm out in the middle of this boat, Brian, or a canoe. I forget the difference. And it's this pond or a lake. I forget the difference between those two. But in essence, there's this question that comes down to me and says, this beaming question, and says, Sterling, is this what you want to do with your life? And then since then, I answered back to that question, no, this is not. And then three things that I really did that really helped change the trajectory of my life for the better was one, I changed my environment. I had good friends, but they were not going where I wanted to go. Great people. Second was I cut out the news, so negative. And many people say, you got to be informed. You got to know what's on the news. It's so negative. And then also if it's important enough, someone will let you know. And the third thing was really focusing on mindset. And I knew I had to change to get where I wanted to go, because they say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. So I knew if I wanted something different, I had to change.
That all struck you while you were in the middle of a pond on a canoe, maybe a boat of some sort?
Yeah. And I was under the influence, as you would say. I'm no longer a drink whatsoever. And that was another thing that I changed as well. But yeah, that was, I was boat, canoe, whatever it was.
Now, was it like a light switch was just flipped, or was it a painful process to live out those three realizations of things that you had to change in your life?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was a painful process, but it was a light switch. And one thing that I did shortly after that was I started going to the library every single day. One person that I first came across, and this is dating myself and I'm not even old, is Earl Nightingale. Earl Nightingale was huge influence on me. One of his I listened to Lead the Field so many times, and this was actually on a CD. So many times that I actually scratched it every time that I would listen to it. And then I came across the Tony Robbins, the Zig Ziglars. And what I experienced through this was I was starting to rewire my thinking and take a lot of those limiting beliefs that I had and replace those with more empowering ones. So when I made the transition from construction to single family home investing, I didn't even think of, okay, what are these obstacles? I don't have the money. I'm too broke. I actually had negative funds in my bank account when I first started. Through the empowering beliefs, it was I was asking better questions of why can I not do it, but how can I do it?
That's great, and all those old CDs, that ancient technology.
Yes.
I can do you one better. I listened to Nightingale Conan tapes on cassette tapes. Like
Oh,
I had the
yes.
old cassette tapes that you pop in your car, and the little wheels and the tape that was on there. Yeah, that's great. So your that light switch went off, and you sought sources of inspiration, people who could help you live out that lightning bolt realization that you had, and how to take action steps on that.
And also showed me what was possible out there because the environment, those of you who haven't gone back to the previous episode, you'll be able to listen to the environment that I came from. But when you're in that environment, you don't know what's outside of that. And then when I came across these things, it really just expanded my awareness. And I'm trying to think whose quote it is exactly, but they says, Ralph Waldo Emerson says, once the mind is expanded with an idea, it can never go back to being the same.
And I would imagine a lot of our listeners have either been in that position that you were in or are in that position now where they need to leave behind the negative influences in their lives. What do you say to those people?
It just comes down to what are your whys? What are your goals? And those people may have the best, I wouldn't even say they're subconsciously pulling you down because it shows them that they should be doing something. So automatically, and that just comes down to an awareness because you may not, the person who's listening to this and has someone who's saying that, they may not be aware that that person's actually doing that. But you'll start to witness that, let's say you go to a seminar and the person says that the person's only trying to sell you a course or that you'll start to realize that. And then it's just time for you to level up and get a new group of individuals that are wanting to stretch you more.
So where did you find that new group of individuals like in your life where you could interact with them personally, not just listen to them on tapes or watch them on, go to a Tony Robbins seminar, but in your life around you? How did you find those people?
So the universe, in a way. And it was because I started expanding my mind and what Tony Robbins says, the reticular activation system. When you're looking for something, your mind will actually seek those things out. So in essence, I was at this CrossFit gym. I was training for a world record. That's a whole nother story in itself. But in essence is I was able to, one, form a relationship with the owners of the gym. I was actually bartering my way in exchange for the membership because CrossFit's super expensive. So I was able to get mentorship from them. And then also that's where I met my mentor as well, who took me under their wing to where I started working for them for completely free. In exchange, I got mentorship. And that's how I got my very first deal, Brian, with found a single family house in which I brought it to them. They funded the purchase price as well as the rehab, and then threw me in there and said, Sterling, go figure it out.
So let's skip ahead to the idea of dealing directly with owners who then you convert into sellers. Talk about that progression. When did you realize, hey, I can contact people directly? And how did you go about that?
Yeah, so this was another moment that experiences when, took the route, knew that, okay, now it's time to transition from single family to multifamily because had closer to about 150 and said that this is very management intensive, several in Indianapolis, several in Dayton, and then decided, hey, let's shift to multifamily now. And then was taking the traditional approach with going through brokers, and it just wasn't working. I mean, it was working, and you got to continue to nurture those relationships, but our numbers were too far out. Just recently, a broker sent over a deal. The most we could have paid was $7 million. And they're saying it's going to trade at $12.5 million. So it's the huge swings. So we decided, well, let's beat the brokers to the punch in essence and go direct to the owner. Of course, if the broker sends over the deal, you're not going to go behind them and then go to the owner. What we're doing is we're building our own list, and then we're starting the prospecting to get in touch with the owner.
So talk about building your list. Are you just sitting down in front of the computer and building this list? Have you hired VAs? What does this list even look like?
So it depends on which stage. For people who are just getting started on here, the very first deal that acquired, which was a 46 unit. So transition from single families right to a 46 unit deal, driving for dollars, took that approach. So picked the south side of Indianapolis, and we knew that there was upside, working class, and upside in terms of the areas going up. It was a solid C plus setting, and started driving this specific neighborhood, found a property that needed work. And you could actually go, we've since sold it, but in essence is the parking lot looked like an alligator's back. It looked very bland. And then from there, everything's public record. And I'm going into the nuts and bolts for everyone, but everything's public record. It was owned in the LLC. You can find out who filed the articles of organization. And then that's normally the actual decision maker. And then use a source such as truepeoplesearch.com, beenverified.com, and not affiliated with either of these, but these are tools that you can use to skip trace, whitepages.com, to find who the owner is, and then boom, gave them a call.
Your list was basically very, just you getting in a car, driving around, seeing, okay, where are the apartments that look like they might be in some distress?
When first started, yes, correct. Now take a more scalable approach, but yes, that's how it started.
That was the beginning. You're building your list. How have you been keeping that list up? Have you expanded out to hire people to help you with that list?
Yeah, so now it is virtual assistants, and I have now pushed myself up. So there's a team that's actually researching so in the event we decide St. Louis, Missouri. So we would go to a source such as CoStar or either Reonomy.com, put that into that database, apartments 75 to 200 units. And of course, if you put that in, you still have to do additional digging, because one thing I want to mention with these sources, even CoStar, is that the data can be hit or miss sometimes. A lot of times it's good, but it can be hit or miss. Prime example is I'm in an 80 unit right now that I have here in Indianapolis I own, and had the rep from CoStar sitting across from me. And I said, could you pull the owner on this property? And they pulled it, and it was the owner a year and a half before, and I had owned it for that duration of time. Didn't have me or my partner on it. So that's just a prime example, you guys, is that all these data providers can still be hit or miss. So I will still go the extra mile and have a virtual assistant comb through all of the ones by lot size and see, because there can be an apartment that is under unit 3 that's actually a 300 unit apartment complex.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. I subscribe to CoStar for my area, my region, and it's great for getting basic information, pulling down some documents and finding ownership information. But I always have to verify the information I'm getting from it, because quite often it's not 100% accurate. So I know they work on that. They have people who call around to talk to owners and sellers and buyers to get accurate information. But a lot of times they're not getting the truth from those people. So that you have to take that into consideration too.
Yeah. And Brian, that's where the gems are. So there was a 156 unit that we acquired. This was end of last year, of which there was so many spider webs that was associated with it. It was a syndication that was put together about 2 decades ago. So some people have passed on, and it went down to other individuals. And what we ended up doing was digging more and found someone who had a very unique last name that, through all the spider webs that we got through and the researching, tying this to this, we found someone who was in Florida who had that unique last name that was in real estate. Gave them a call. Turns out they were one of the decision makers with the property. So fast forward, so this very same property, I actually sent it over to brokers, Brian, and said, hey, do you all have any insight? We're actually looking to get in touch with them. Many of them said no. And then that's when we started digging. And after we acquired, they said, how in the heck did you get in touch with that person? I had no. So the main premise of the story, everyone, is when you hit a wall and you are in a situation where you're like, gosh, this is so difficult to find who the decision maker is. That's where other people have stopped, moved on. That's for you, a good indication for you to go the extra mile.
I love that example. And that sounds like a more recent example. It's a 156 unit that was in Indianapolis.
Correct.
But it had been around for a long time. The true decision maker was down in Florida. Did you have your VAs hunt him down? Did you hire someone to track him? I mean, I understand the cross-referencing between different sources, but who ultimately found that person?
That was me in that case, because it was one of those and the most interesting thing is, Brian, and this is a surreal story for everyone who's on here, is that I remember visiting friends when I was in my mid-teens at that apartment community and never thought one day I would someday be owning it. So that's a cool experience I wanted to share with everyone that shows what's possible. And it was still in the same condition, interesting enough. But
it hadn't changed a bit.
It hadn't changed.
Let's dig into that. So through your hard effort, you found this guy in Florida. Mm-hmm. I imagine it was easy as just calling up and saying, hey, sell me your apartment. And he said, okay, sure.
No, it wasn't that by any means, but they were in a situation where it came down actually to the right timing. So a year and a half before that, we were actually prospecting, looking to get in touch with them, had no results. And then finally, just one day, I sent it over and probably about 4 or 5 months prior to that, I sent that to brokers, had no results. And I said, well, now let me revisit it and just take the time to really dive deep and go through all the spider webs to figure out who it was. And then finally, when I did get in touch with the individual, and it took a couple of attempts to get in contact with them, that they said, yeah, we would be open to selling. So when we actually made that initial contact point this was one that out of all the ones that we've acquired, that they were about 75 to 80%, they were already considering it once we had actually called.
Fill us in on how you work that. So you get a hold of the owner finally after all this hard work. No one else can get a hold of him because no one else knows how to.
The ninja techniques.
Yeah. So Sterling, you use your Sterling ninja techniques, and you get him on the phone, and he says, "I'd be open to it." Where do you take it from there?
So from there, it was just meeting in person and building that rapport and that relationship. And actually, there was another decision maker involved that we actually had to convince. And this is one thing I always ask with people is when someone says they are the decision maker, they could be one of the decision makers. So a question, instead of saying, are you the decision maker? You could say, other than yourself, who would be involved with the decision making on the sale of this property? So we actually had to convince the other partner, but in essence they were motivated due to they just didn't have the cash to put in the money to take care of the improvements, and they were just essentially running it into the ground. But the next steps, in essence, was he was making a trip here to Indianapolis, and we went and met with him.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. So you said, hey, are you okay with us meeting with you when you're in Indianapolis? Mm-hmm. How do you prepare for that meeting?
So bring in a team. So we have not on-site staff. So the community I'm in this is where we run operations from, like the management company that manages the holding. So ended up bringing a team to meet with them. And then what we did was we walked a couple units to understand, okay, well, based upon our previous experience of renovating these type of units, this is going to be our average cost. So we multiply that times 156 units for the interior. And then now we're looking at the exterior, saying that all the roofs actually needed to be replaced. So we got that. The windows were old. We looked at the HVAC. So these are things we did. And then that's when we turned around an offer to them. And one thing I want to mention, Brian, is I made a $1 million screw up on this. So that's one thing I want to mention for everyone. More than happy to go into it.
Let's put that aside. I want to hear about this $1 million screw up, but I want to know how you and your team got together. You said, we're going to go meet with this potential seller. Mm-hmm. How do you strategize that meeting?
Ours is just more of just building the relationship and the rapport. So we sat down with him, and he was actually a really cool guy, and just talked about, why are you wanting to sell the property? Why us? In terms of all the other people who have reached out to you, which in this case, I don't think there was actually anyone there were people, but just in general, understanding what their motivation is, and then just keying in on that to say, hey, that we're the buyers. And at the time we're sitting down we're building our credibility, saying that, hey, we actually own this apartment here. We actually own this apartment here. So in essence we're forming a relationship, building a rapport. One thing I always do when I meet with an owner is I bring a thank you card. It's something that I give to them for just thanking them for their time. But in essence, that first initial meeting is just really just building rapport with the individual, telling them a little bit about us, that there's no issues with closing. We're not going to string you along and retrade. And then we'll walk a couple units.
So I like what you're saying there, because so often you see people come in and they try to convince someone by talking about themselves. Your strategy was to let him talk about what he wanted, what he was looking to accomplish, and why he might want to sell. So I think that's an important point you just made there.
Yeah, and because many of the times it's not about price. Many people feel that that's the case. The apartment I'm currently in is the operator actually went with us over going with brokers, and we probably saved $600,000 to $700,000. And people say, why would he sell it to you in that case? One, it wasn't about price. They just wanted the cash to start doing development in Chicago. That was their main thing, and they actually liked us once we actually met with them and form that relationship with them. So that's what it really comes down to. I really want to mention to everyone. They say, what's the tactic? What's the strategy? It's just the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Just being a good person. If the person on the other end feels it's just transactional, then that's a lot of times where they'll actually end up going with someone else.
Somewhere along the line, you screwed up and it cost you $1 million.
This is why it's so important to have a team. So I verbally gave them an offer of $7 million, of which I was too aggressive on pushing up the rents by $75. So everyone who's on here, you say $75, that's not that much. However, you consider $75 across 150 units times 12 months. So in essence they verbally accepted that. And then we ended up getting the team involved to further do rent comps. And in essence, our leasing team and the people who would actually be the ones actually doing the lease up, they said, yeah, Sterling, you were too aggressive on those rents. I would be a lot more conservative than where you're at. So after we ran the numbers, we were closer to $6 million on the purchase. So that first conversation we had with the seller was not very easy, but it just comes down to they were motivated. And I have people that reach out to me and say that I submit offers and I receive no counters. That's because the person's not motivated. Many sellers that aren't motivated or owners, in a sense, say that there's no reason for me to sell the property because I'm having a good return on it. And if I do sell it, I'm going to have to go out and get something else. So in that case, it's just best to move on to someone where there's actually a need.
Sterling, you made a verbal offer. Was it in that first meeting? And if so, why did you feel that it was necessary to make an offer before actually digging into the financials and getting the input from your team?
That was my mistake. So what you just said was an error on my side. Was I just moved too quickly. And that's one thing I tend to do, is move with speed. And in essence that's what happened. I moved too quickly. I ran the numbers on my side, which I would say decent, good to running numbers. But I have other people who actually do the deeper analysis. And yeah, I submitted that and they said, well, Sterling, oh, that's good. Well, let's go ahead and take a further deep into it. And we actually had the one of the community managers dig into it and said, yeah, that's too aggressive.
How did you course correct? Did you have to go back to the sellers and say, guess what? I overestimated what your property's worth? I mean, tell us about that conversation and how it went down.
It was a tough conversation. And actually, the first time we had it, it did not get communicated well until we did the follow-up email. And they said, oh, that's what you were asking for. So it was not communicated properly on the.
How was it communicated and what was the confusion?
In essence, was we did the walkthrough. So we pinned it on the walkthroughs more so. In essence, when we did the walkthroughs, many of the water leaks. So we received the financials that they sent over to us was very, it was ran mom and pop. So that was one issue. And then also the water charges were high. So we actually didn't even pin it on me. So that was one way that we ended up, we pinned it on those types of items, that renovations were more than we expected. The water bill is higher. We don't know if we can get that down. And then in essence was we mentioned that we would need a reduce of the purchase price of to $6 million. I'm trying to think how exactly, if it was said that direct, but in essence, just after the call, when we did a summary of the email and the person replied, one of the decision makers, they said, I did not get that whatsoever from that call.
Oh, so they didn't understand that you were asking for a reduction in price.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've noticed this phenomenon where you can have 4 or 5 people in a room all talking about the same thing. And they all think they're on the same page. But then at some point they realize, wait a minute, the other person is on a completely different plane right now as far as what we're talking about. And sometimes you have to kind of start with just the basics and almost sound stupid to the point where you're like speaking very plainly and clearly as to what is going on so that other people actually get it. Because so many times there is a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding in the room that people aren't even aware of.
Yeah. Or maybe when we were saying it, they were thinking in their head, I know these guys are not asking for a $1 million reduction at this moment. So that could have been it too. But we ended up settling on about an $800,000 in terms of the reduction. So we bought it closer to about $6.2 million.
How did you recover from that after saying, hey, we need to drop it to 6 million and they didn't even get that from your conversation? How did you recover from it in the follow-up?
It took several weeks for them to just sit on it. And my partner who I own the apartments with, fantastic in terms of really, he came in, he's more of the analytical individual. And that's one thing I always talk about everyone is just myself understanding what my strengths are and my weaknesses. So I was able to have a different angle too for him to come in at. And it was just, they had to sit on it for a while. And luckily that we were in a situation, and this is why I always talk about and we haven't even gotten to it, is the value-based follow-up and making it about a relationship. Because all the sellers owners then converted to sellers, is that the key thing is by me staying top of mind is actually removed all the other potential buyers. That way, when we did ask for that concession, that they were still just dealing with us. They didn't even consider actually going out and shopping it around.
So you kind of had a lock on them because you were in the forefront of their mind. Talk about that follow-up, because I know that that's very important to you, because quite often the initial response from a seller is just going to be no.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I'm sure you hear that all the time. So what is the importance of follow-up and how do you employ that?
The follow-up is absolutely the greatest sales secret. I just want to mention that to everyone. And they could say, sales? What do you mean sales? And I know we touched a little bit on this last time. What I mean by the greatest sales secret is even when you're buying, you're still selling. You have to sell the other person on why you're the right buyer. But in essence, the follow-up is where the money is made, is where separates the rookies from the newbies from the amateurs from the pros, and the pros from the elite. And the way that I follow up is just being creative. So one that I like to use, and as of recent, is I will actually follow up with more local owners that are here and say, not in this point in time because there's COVID, but I would say, hey, this was right before COVID, that current meetup, they're looking for individuals such as yourself who are successful operators, would love to have you come speak at the event. So it's just a way to stay top of mind versus saying, hey, now you're interested in selling your property. Now you're interested in selling your property. And then another follow up I will do is I will actually send out birthday cards. And people say, well, you don't even know when their birthday is. On the card, it'll say, I may be a little bit too soon. I may be a little bit late, but I just want to ensure that I got you covered.
And this is something you do with people, potential sellers.
Yeah. And I know one guy that actually sends out potatoes. And yes, everyone has said potatoes because it's in essence a pattern interrupt. And he actually had a good response rate. But one of the individuals called and said, "Did you send me a potato, Steve?" He's like, "Yeah, I sent you a potato. But now that I've got you on the phone, and then you go right back into it."
So the potato has no significance other than to just make the guy scratch his head and call him.
Yeah, exactly. Just staying top of mind. That's all it comes down to. Because it's timing. Someone may not be interested, and I've had this happen that they weren't interested the first initial touch point. However, several months later, that they decide, I'm done with this property. I actually want to go do something else. I want to go parasailing in Florida. And then you follow up with them that right time. And then that just gives you the upper hand over someone who just followed up 2 to 3 times. And they said, well, they're not interested. I'm just going to move on.
Can you take us through another example of a property that you acquired off market, the communication you had with the owner, and the follow up, and how that helped you acquire that property?
So I'll talk about, this was the 80 unit that was in, I like to pronounce it Louisville, Kentucky, but it's actually Louisville, Kentucky. So one thing, it took the 7th attempt just to get in contact with, and I would say this was the influencer, not even the decision maker. So this was the son. So it took 7 attempts just to get in contact with the individual. And then it was the son. And they said, nah, we really would not be of much interest in selling the property. And why we targeted this one is, one, we got insights from a local property management company that the occupancy was very low, and it was hovering at that for the course of years. It was under rented, quite a bit of deferred maintenance. So called the individual, 7th attempt, got in touch with them. They said they really weren't interested in selling. And from that is, I could tell I was building a relationship with them that the son just got thrown into the fire by the father, who was the decision maker, to manage the property. So that whole time I followed up with them. I was actually making trips from Indianapolis to Louisville. So I would call him. His name was Bill, and his father's name was Bill too. But in essence, I would say, hey, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. Would like to put my hand in your hand. I can actually come by and bring you some coffee. So those were the types of things I would do. So I would call them on Monday, and I would say I would be in town on Thursday. They agree. I make a trip down to Louisville. And of course, I would line up other owners too. That way, if something came up, I would have other things lined up. But that's what I was doing. So 5 months later, through consistent follow-up, they converted from not being interested to now interested.
Okay. So once they indicate their interest, how do you proceed from there?
So from this point in time, we just request to receive the T12 as well as the rent roll, and then we start the underwriting.
So the T12 being the trailing 12 months of income and expenses, and the rent roll. And that's the information you need to kind of make a determination. Hey, what condition is this property in? What's its value?
Yeah, correct. And then also there was a local property management company that had already had insights on what needed to be done to the property, because that owner was actually considering them to third party. So we got insights on what needed to be done, and we built that into our underwriting.
Yeah, and I think that's important, having someone there who knows the property, or at least a management company who knows the market, to kind of help you with your determination of value.
Yeah, the property management company, we leaned on them so much because we're here in Indianapolis, and I was visiting Louisville so many times, but just being able to rely on them and say that, hey, we're looking to do these renovations, vinyl plank flooring, 2-tone paint scheme for mica countertops, repainting the cabinetry. What type of rents are we going to be able to get once we put that in? And then what are going to be the costs associated with that? So that helped tremendously in terms of what we were able to build. Okay, this is how it's currently performing. We invest this is going to be our return. However, when we put in those renovations, we're now all into this. what is now going to be a return on investment.
So Sterling, how did that work out for you? What did you end up paying for that property? And was your determination of value and your offer, is that what you ended up paying? And then how did it work out in real life?
So one thing is I'd have to pull up the actual numbers. I believe it was just over $2 million. One thing that we did experience, and this is one of my favorite negotiation tactics that I want to share with everyone. So we ended up getting through the due diligence, and in essence, about $300,000 worth of work was uncovered. So this is my favorite strategy, which is the multiple options. So the A was that, hey, we will stick at the current purchase price. However, you take care of the renovations, seller. The B option is we will take care of the renovations. However, we need a reduction from the purchase price. And guess what the C option is, Brian?
Credit at close toward the repairs.
A mutual release from the contract.
Oh, so just both parties walk away?
Yeah, exactly. So that's what it came. Yeah, by far my favorite. I always like to make the last option as much of a pain as possible. Of course, that A would be a pain too for them to make all those repairs. But in essence, they picked the B option. So what we were going into it for was we actually needed, when we got through actually walking all the units, we got the inspection report back. We're like, oh, the decks was something that we did not foresee having to address those. So that's when we came down to that scenario, and they actually picked B. I believe we purchased that closer. It was about $28,000 per door. So whatever 28,000 is times 80 units.
Do you remember what were able to get the value up to?
Oh, we're going through that at this moment.
Oh, so, in terms of the process right now.
So it's closer to about $1 million of renovations. So now have shifted away from those. So that was $1 million in terms of renovations. The 156 unit here is $2 million in renovations. So now shifting from that 1970s built product to more the 1980s to 2000.
So you're changing your parameters now.
Yes, correct.
And why is that? Because, I'd assume it may be the older product, the 70s product needs a lot more improvements. Dollars.
Yeah, it's more, you could say diversification, but yeah, more improvements. There's more risk associated with that level of renovations because there's more moving parts. There's a lot more money that's floating around. You really got to be dialed in and have your I's and T's dotted and crossed. So now just shifting the department that I'm in, was about $300,000 worth of work. And this was really just smooth sailing. This was one of those that was just an absolute steal. I'm surprised after we purchased it, we didn't go to jail. But
so this is where you are right now as you're talking to me. You're in an 80-unit apartment building?
Yes, correct.
So tell us about that. Like, is this a recent acquisition?
So this was the third acquisition. So this was the acquisition right before the 80 unit that was in Louisville, Kentucky.
And was this another off-market deal where you contacted the owner?
Yeah, this was the individual that I had mentioned was looking to take the cash and do development in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And what we did was, and this is when we got a team. So there's the front office that's just over there. And we had a sit down with him. Well, actually just him. And it was me, the other individual that was running the acquisitions team at that point in time. Shout out to E-Money, Eric. And there was Vanessa, who's the one who's got tremendous experience in terms of property management, has managed well over 3,000 units. She's actually the one that told me I was too aggressive on the other apartment. So everything's just coming full circle. But in essence, it is that we just sat down and just talked, and he actually went into his story, and then we told a little bit about us, and then he said, yeah, I mean, I really don't need to sell, but I like you guys, and I'm looking to actually get out of this. He had another apartment that was in Anderson. We didn't want that one. We just wanted this one. And he said, yeah, I'm just done. I just want to do development now on the residential side.
So Sterling, you send out birthday cards. You have a friend who sends potatoes. I'm not sure what I would think as a potential seller if someone sent me a potato, but I guess it would get my attention. What are some other follow-up techniques and advice that you can give our listeners?
So one, many may have heard this, but I like to use the Rubik's Cube is one. And it's just and this is mostly after I've sent a letter of intent And this is what's used before actually going to contract, and I don't hear from the owner. So I'll send a Rubik's Cube to them with a small note that says, hey, let's figure this out. So that's one. And then handwritten letters. By far, my favorite follow-up that I like to use is actually the personal visit. So I will actually drop in the owner completely cold. But however, I've never been kicked out. And that's just one that really gives you the upper hand over the competition, because now you're able to put a face to a name.
So I'm just curious right now where we are with coronavirus. We're recording this in October of 2020. When this comes out, it'll probably be closer to November, December. Have you cooled on the market right now? Have you slowed down, or are you barreling forward, guns a-blazing, into buying more property?
So overall, I mean, we're still steadily on acquisitions mode. However, haven't had any acquisitions in terms of our parameters of the 75 to 200 unit apartment complexes. So many of what we've actually been doing is getting back into our business, actually implementing SOPs, so standard operating procedures, and really just laying down more of the foundation. So once we do get once we're out of this and a possible quote unquote correction happens, that we'll be ready to rock and roll. So taking this time to really build more of the systems, put procedures in place. That way we can really just keep scaling even more.
And what do those systems involve? How are you improving your systems right now?
So one thing that we switched over to was recently Asana. And Asana is just a project management tool. And what we do is we just put all of our checklist items, meaning if we hire a new rep for the acquisitions, okay, this is what you'll want to do step by step. This is day one. This is day two. When we get someone in to do researching, to use Reonomy, for instance, to pull leads from a database, this is what it looks like, step-by-step system. That way, we're not constantly having to be the bottleneck on each and everything, that we can just plug someone in. That way, we can keep pushing ourselves up to focus on the highest value activities.
Sterling, as we wrap it up, do you have any parting advice for our listeners? Anything that you think they should be keeping their eye on right now?
I would just say myself personally is, and this is just an experience here, is always focusing on mindset, especially through the whole COVID. When we were in the midst of the COVID, that really was not great in terms of the mental for myself personally, because I'm not perfect, everyone that's out there. But really what kept helping me through the storm is, one, just cutting out the news, even though it was just around everywhere, and just putting more reading positivity. And actually, I had a very great experience, and I don't want to get all teary-eyed or anything, was with my little one. I taught her how to ride her bike without her training wheels. And I would say, as a dad, me letting go of that seat and her just riding, that was really what broke through all of the negativity, that bright and shining light. So in essence, when you're feeling down, go out and help someone.
How would people get a hold of you if they wanted to find out more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so one is I'm on Instagram, Sterling White Official. One more time, that is Sterling White Official. And you can visit sonderinvestmentgroup.com. That is SONDER, investmentgroup.com. Don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'm here to be of value to you.
Sterling, it's been great talking with you again. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. I really appreciate you talking about overcoming limiting mindsets, talking about working with owners off market, and turning them into sellers. And then also just the follow-up techniques, because follow-up is so important, and you seem to be very dogged about follow-up, and that's great. Again, it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
No, thank you for the opportunity, Brian. Keep being awesome.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.